Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Beis Amid Aleph. Will be Mirz Hashem concluding Siman Shin Lamed Vav and beginning Siman Shin Lamed Zayin. It's pretty amazing, you know. I always say over the pasuk says Chacham Levav Liyamin. A Chacham has his heart to the right. So I always say if you're learning by a sefer, and you're learning a little bit every day, if you look to the right, you see what you accomplished. A ksil, a foolish person, his heart is to the left. You look and you see, oh, look what I still have to do. I have so much left to do. And you get miyuyish. You take a look, Chelik Gimel. We're about to start Siman Shin Lamed Zayin. Look to the Yamin. Take a look what we've accomplished over here. We're Mirz Hashem today learning Daf Kuf Pei Beis Amid Beis. We've done so much here in Hilchos Shabbos. Everybody has to take a moment to take a look to the Yamin and feel good about it and take chizuk to go on weiter. So Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Beis Amid Beis. We pick up today on Kuf Pei Beis Amid Aleph, 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch near the end of the line. Ve'im na'atz by yaseid. So that is in Siman Shin Lamed Vav, in the middle of Sif Yud Beis, near the end of Sif Yud Beis. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kabeis Yisrael, Hanesunim Batzaru Bashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, Hamakayim Yerachem Aleihem, V'yotziei Mitzaru Lervacha, Me'afela La'ora, Mishibel L'Geula, Hashta Bagolo V'zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Esther Fradel Bas Chana, Moshe Meir ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Rivka Bas Shira Leah, Chava Hadassah Bas Serel, Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, and Gila Shifra Bas Ilana Udel. They should all have a refuah shalema b'seich shar Chayla Yisrael, and we are mispal that the schus of limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael, the Rabbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael b'chal Makayim Shehem. So here in Sif Yud Beis, we've been learning, we're continuing to learn, we're in Sif Yud Gimel. I said Sif Yud Beis, my apologies, it's Siman Shin Lamed Vav, Sif Yud Gimel. So here in Siman Shin Lamed Vav, we've been learning about the halachas of being mishtamish bi'ilon, making use of a tree. And to remind everyone, the Chazal asered a person to be mishtamish bi'ilon on Shabbos. You're not allowed to make any use of a tree on Shabbos. Why? Gzera shemiyala v'yitloish. Chazal were afraid that if you're allowed to make use of a tree in any way on Shabbos, you may come to climb up into the tree, and so what? You may come to climb up into the tree and then pick a fruit. Or, even if it's not a fruit-bearing tree, you might come to break off a branch. Or, it might have some pretty blossoms, and you might decide to pick some. In all of these cases, you would be over toilish daraisa. So to prevent somebody from coming and being over toilish by breaking or picking something off of a tree, the Chazal made a gzera, and they said you're not allowed to be mishtamish bi'ilan. So that's very high level, the Yisad Rabbanan of being mishtamish bi'ilan. So you can't climb a tree, you can't hang off a tree branch, you can't hang your hat on a tree branch, you can't hang your jacket or your bekasha on a tree branch. So you're not allowed to be mishtamish bi'ilan. Yesterday in Sif Yud Gimel, the Mechaber told us that this gzera extends beyond just being mishtamish directly bi'ilan. Not only are you not allowed to make direct use of the ilan, you're also not allowed to make indirect use of the ilan. What do I mean by that? So we learned yesterday the concept of tzadei ha'ilan. There is the tree itself, the ilan gufa, the tree itself. So if you hang on the tree, you're using the tree itself. If you lean on the tree, and you lean your entire body weight on the tree, so that if the tree would suddenly vanish, you would fall, you are using the ilan gufa. You're being mishtamish be'ilan. You're making direct use of the tree. But what if something is connected to the tree? So the case I used yesterday was, you take a 2x4 brace, and you screw a 2x4 brace onto a tree. Maybe what it's for is, my neighbor, when I used to live in Edison, New Jersey, I had a neighbor, an Eina Yehudi neighbor who was very big into trimming and pruning his trees. He had very, very tall trees. And he would have sections of 2x4 that were screwed into the tree at regular intervals like the rungs of a ladder. And he would go climbing up these 60, 70 foot tall trees in order to go lop off branches up on top. So if you take a 2x4 brace and you screw it to the tree, and now you climb on that brace, or you screw a brace to the tree and you lean a ladder on the brace of the tree. In that case, you're not using the Ilan Gufa, you're not making use of the tree itself. This is what's called stade Ilan. You're making use of something that is attached to the tree or fully supported by the tree. That's called stade Ilan. And in the beginning of Sif Yud Gimel, the Mechaber told us, Asur lehishtamesh b'tztadei ha'ilan. You're not allowed, the same way you're not allowed to be mishtamish b'ilan, you're also not allowed to be mishtamish b'tztadei ilan. You're not allowed to make use of these things that are connected to the tree. But then the Mechaber said, Ava b'tzidei tztadin mutter. You are allowed to make use if you go 1 degree further out. If you're not using the Ilan Gufa, you're not using the tree, and you're not using the Tztadei Ilan, you're not using the thing that's connected to the tree, but instead you're using Tzidei Tztadin. You're using something that is connected or leaning on the Tztadei Ilan, the thing that's connected to the tree. So, case we learned yesterday, you have the tree, you took a 2x4 brace and you screwed it to the tree, and now on Erev Shabbos, you took a ladder and you leaned it against the 2x4 brace. Now on Shabbos, you want to climb up the ladder. Said the Mechaber, that you're allowed to do. Why? Because when you climb up the ladder, you're using the ladder. You're directly, yes, indirectly, you're using even the tree, but directly, you're using the ladder. Now, the ladder is not using the tree. The ladder is leaning on the Tztadei Ilan, on the 2x4 brace. So the ladder is not directly using the tree either. The ladder is directly using the 2x4 brace, which is Tztadei Ilan. So you are not using the Ilan, you're not using the tree, you're not using the 2x4 brace, the Tztadei Ilan, you're using the ladder. The ladder is Tzidei Tztadin. So again, if you had the 2x4 brace on the tree, and on Erev Shabbos, you leaned the ladder against the tree, so you set the ladder up on Erev Shabbos, which you were allowed to do. Now on Shabbos, you could climb up the ladder because you're using Tzidei Tztadin. Now, to lean the ladder against the brace on Shabbos would be usher. Because if you take the ladder and you lean it onto the brace on Shabbos, well, when you do that, you're directly making use of the brace. And that's Tzidei Tztadin. You're not allowed to do that. Now, we go weiter on the same theme right now, where the Mechaber really just gives us another example of the same halacha. Says the Mechaber, 2 lines off the bottom at the end of the line, Kuf Pei Beis Amud Aleph, V'im notz by Yosed. Let's say you knock a peg into the tree. Or nowadays, you go to Home Depot and you buy a big metal hook and you screw a big metal hook into the tree. V'toile by kalkala. And then you hang from the hook or from the peg a basket. Okay, so let's do the math. The Mechaber does it for us. Hayosed, the hook or the peg, nikrat stadin. That is tztadei ha'ilan, right? It's something attached to the tree. It's not the tree itself. It's something attached to the tree. So the hook of the peg is tztadei ilan. V'hakalkala, and the basket that's hanging from the hook or from the tree, kitzidei tztadin, is now tzidei tztadin, right? Tree, hook is tztadei ilan, basket hanging on the hook is tzidei tztadin. Okay, so now you're allowed to make use of the basket, right? And you're now says the Mishnah Berurah. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah Samach Gimel. V'hakalkala kitzidei tztadin. The basket now becomes tzidei tztadin. Lefikach, therefore, mutter lahaniach ba'peiros. You would be allowed to put peiros into the basket. V'litoil mimena, and you could take peiros out of the basket, because when you put fruits into the basket or take fruits out of the basket, what are you using? You're using the basket. The basket is tzidei tztadin, so it's mutter. Aval hakalkala atzma, but how about the basket itself? Also litlois b'yased, you're not allowed to go on Shabbos and hang the basket on the hook, because when you hang the basket on the hook, you're making use of the hook. You're directly using the hook by hanging the basket on the hook. The hook is tzadei ilan. Not allowed to do that. If the basket is hanging on the hook from Erev Shabbos, you're not allowed to go take the basket off the hook, because that's also called using the tzadei ilan, using the hook. The chanal gabi sulam, essentially the same halacha that we learned by the ladder. Now the Mishnah Berurah says an interesting thing. No, I'm sorry. This is just directly, again, follows what we learned. This is nothing, no big chiddush here. Says the Mishnah Berurah weiter. Let's say the basket is not hanging on the hook. The basket is hanging on a branch. Well, in that case, also lital chayfetz mimena, you're not allowed to take something out of the basket, v'chein litein l'soicha, and you're not allowed to put something into the basket. Because if the basket is hanging directly on the tree, then the basket is tzadei ilan. You're not allowed to use tzadei ilan. So you can't put something in the basket or take something from the basket. To come mishtamish b'tzadin, because that would be using tzadei ilan. So again, this is just a variation of the same halacha that we learned yesterday by the ladder. If you have a hook screwed into the tree, and then you hang a basket from the hook, so then the hook is tzadei ilan, the basket is tzidei tzadin. Tzidei tzadin you're allowed to use. So go ahead, put an apple in the basket, take an apple off the basket, no problem. If there's a hook screwed into the tree, can you hang a basket on the hook on Shabbos? No, that would be like leaning the ladder against the 2x4 brace on Shabbos. You can't lean the ladder on the 2x4 brace on Shabbos, because then you're directly using the 2x4 brace, which is tzadei ilan. You can't take a basket and hang it on the hook on Shabbos, because then you're directly using the hook. The hook is tzadei ilan. You're not allowed to do that. So you can't hang the basket on the hook. You can't take the basket off the hook. But if the basket is there from Erev Shabbos, you could put an apple into it. You could take an apple out of it, because then you're using the basket, which is tzidei tzadin, and that is mutter. Now is where the Mishnah Berurah makes a little bit of a tangential point. Says the Mishnah Berurah, let's say we're dealing with a basket that has a very narrow opening. So, tree, hook, tzadei ilan, basket, tzidei tzadin, apples in the basket, go ahead. You're allowed to take apples out, you're allowed to put apples in, because you're using the basket. The basket is tzidei tzadin. But now, says the Mishnah Berurah, what if this basket that you're allowed to put stuff in and take stuff out of on Shabbos has a very narrow opening? So what? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kishenoitel chayfetz min hachakala, when you go in there and you gotta use force to pull something out of the basket or to put something into the basket, meinid ha'ilan, since now you have to work with force, you're gonna shake the tree. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Aser b'chol inyan mipnei shal yedei zeh mishtamish be'ilan. That's aser. The Mishnah Berurah is telling me here, you're not allowed to shake the tree. Even if you're indirectly shaking the tree through your use of the tzidei tzadin. You're allowed to use the tzidei tzadin. But if your use of the tzidei tzadin is going to cause you to shake the tree, you have a problem. Because you're not allowed to shake the tree, says the Mishnah Berurah, Asar b'chol inyan, mipnei sha'yedei zeh mishtamish be'ilan. Chiddush. This is called, says the Mishnah Berurah, being mishtamish be'ilan. If what you want to do, you want to take something out of the basket, if that is going to have the effect of shaking the tree, that's called being mishtamish be'ilan, and you're not allowed to do it. Now the Mishnah Berurah really qualifies something that he said earlier, which I find interesting, and that is that all the way in the beginning of the Siman, so on Kuf Pei Amid Aleph, in Ois Cotton, Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Beis, the Mechaber said in Sif Aleph, Ein oilam be'ilan, you're not allowed to go up into a tree, bein lach, bein yavesh, whether it's a fresh, moist, live tree, or bein yavesh, or it's a dried out dead tree, ve'ein nislim boy, and you're not allowed to suspend yourself, so you can't hang off a branch of a tree. In Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Beis, the Mishnah Berurah said, V'hu adin de'ein nishanin v'nismakin boy. He brought down the Gemara from Erev and Kuf Amid Aleph that you're not allowed to lean on a tree. So in Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Beis, the Mishnah Berurah said flat out, you're not allowed to lean on a tree. Over here, the Mishnah Berurah qualifies that halacha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ulihi shayin be'ilan, to lean on a tree. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it depends. Ima adam bari, if you're talking about a strong, healthy individual, mutter, you're allowed to lean on a tree. V'tosh kayach, but a weak person, aser, is not allowed to lean on a tree. What's pshat? Says the Mishnah Berurah Atam, the reason for this distinction is as follows. The adam bari, a healthy, strong individual, einoi saimech alav elama'at. A strong, healthy individual, says the Chavetz Chaim, when he leans on a tree, he doesn't lean his full body weight on the tree. He stands there and he leans a little bit on the tree, but he's really supporting himself on his own 2 feet. He's not really counting on the tree for support. And therefore, it says the Mishnah Berurah, that's not called making use of the tree. Aval tosh kaichai, but a weak individual, tzarich lismech b'chal kaichai alav. When a weak individual goes to lean on a tree, he's doing it because he's eiskamatert. He's doing it because he's tired out. He feels weak. He's leaning on the tree and he's counting on the tree for support. And therefore, that would be called being mishtamish b'mechuber. That would be called making use of the tree, and that would be aser. Continues the Mishnah Berurah and he says, "V'hani mili kishe'ena menidoi." Now, this whole discussion is only germane if by leaning on the tree you're not going to shake the tree. So if we're talking about a 65-year-old oak tree and you lean on the tree, you're not going to shake the tree, fine. So then if you're not supporting your whole body weight, if you're a healthy individual, you can lean on the tree. But if you're going to shake the tree by leaning on it, says the Chavetz Chaim, afilu b'bari aser, that even by a healthy person it's also to lean on the tree, tezeh gufa shimushu. Because like the Mishnah Berurah just finished saying before, shaking a tree is called being b'shtamish be'ilan. Now, you notice I'm opening up my Dirshu Mishnah Berurah over here, and that's because I'm wondering if there's a Dirshu footnote here. You see, the Mishnah Berurah just finished making a distinction. The Mishnah Berurah just said over here that the question of leaning on a tree, no, they didn't put a note here, which I find interesting. He put a note here that the distinction of whether or not you could lean on a tree is healthy or weak. Healthy person could lean on a tree. Why? Because he's not going to lean his full body weight on the tree. But a weak individual can't lean on a tree because he is going to rest his whole body weight on the tree. I believe there are those that bring down, and that's why I was looking quickly in the Dirshu. It might be here in the Bir Halacha, that the truth is the distinction is not so much whether you're weak and whether you're weak or healthy. The distinction is how much of your body weight are you leaning on the tree. If a strong, healthy person decides that he wants to take a nap and he wants to lean his entire body weight on the tree, and it's to the degree that if the tree would vanish, he would plummet to the ground, so he is resting his full body weight on the tree, that's called being mishtamish be'ilan. If the weak person is strong enough that he's not using the tree to support his full body weight, and if the tree would vanish, he would still be able to stand, then that's mutter. So it's not so much a differentiation between weak and healthy as much as it's a differentiation between how much weight are you placing on the tree. It doesn't conclude Siman Shimon Lamed Vav because we have a Ramah that we have to do here. So let's turn back to Kuf Pei Beis Amud Aleph. Let's go to the end of the bottom line on Kuf Pei Beis Amud Aleph. Says the Ramah Hagah, Umutter liga be'ilan. You're allowed to touch a tree. Ubelvad shelo yinidenu, as long as you don't shake it. Shaking a tree is a problem. Mishtamish be'ilan. Touching a tree, no problem touching a tree. Says the Ramah Vaiter, bar amoik, if you have a deep pit, afilu meya amos, even if it's 100 amos deep, so you have a 200-foot pit over here. Mutter leireid velalois, you're allowed to go down into the pit, you're allowed to come up out of the pit. Umetapes, you could climb, v'yoyre to go down. Umetapes v'oile, you could climb your way up. V'loy chayshinan shemiyakor karka b'yiridasai v'aliyasai. We're not afraid that somehow by climbing up and down, you're going to take out karka, you're going to dig out dirt from the pit and be over chayrish or something else. Now the truth is, it's an interesting Ramah. It's based on a Gemara in Erev and a Kuf Amud Aleph that happens to come right after the Gemara in Erev and Kuf Amud Aleph that tells us about the Gzera that you're not allowed to be Mishtamish Be'ilon. So right after the Gemara in Eruvin talks about being Mishtamish Be'ilon on Shabbos, it talks about the fact that it's mutter to go down into a pit. Rashi over there suggests that what the Gemara is telling you is that you might think, if you learn the halacha, that you're not allowed to climb up into a tree. So again, I always make this point, that whenever we discuss whether something is mutter or asr on Shabbos, we have to do the math. You want something to be asr on Shabbos, the first thing you look at is, what malacha would it be? There are lamites malachas. So you're asking me if something is mutter or asr. Well, what would it fall under? It has to fall under one of the categories. So we have 39 of us malachas. Which one would it be? You want to know if something is muktzah. Well, okay, that's also categories. You're asking me if something is muktzah. What category should it fall under? You're asking me if a hammer is muktzah. Yes, a hammer is muktzah. Why? Because it's a klisha malach delizer. You're asking me if a stone in the backyard is muktzah. Yes. Why? Because it's muktzah machmas gufay. It has absolutely no Shabbos use. Hammer, klisha malach delizer. You could use it to crack open a walnut. You want to use it tzarch mekayma and tzarch gufay. It's mutter. So we always have to get used to doing the math. So now, you're telling me, Gemara and Eruvin, you're not allowed to climb up a tree. Why? Why? It doesn't fall under a malacha. There's no issa malacha involved in climbing a tree. So what's the problem? Okay, the answer is Gzera d'Rabbanan. Shema Yalav Yitlosh. We're afraid you might go up. But somebody might have learned the Gemara and Eruvin, and somebody might have thought, maybe the reason it's usher to climb a tree on Shabbos has nothing to do with Gzera Shema Yalav Yitlosh. Maybe the problem with climbing a tree is terchi yisera. Climbing a tree is an inappropriate level of exertion on Shabbos. Well, in that case, you wouldn't be allowed to climb down into a pit and climb up out of a pit either. L'chari, that's also exertion. Kamash Balon the Gemara that you're allowed to climb up and out because it's not an excess amount of tircha. And also, there's no gzera of being mashve gumais. We don't say, it's another thing you might have said. You might have said, you're telling me that I can't climb a tree because it's Gzera Shema Yalav Yitlosh. So maybe I can't go down into a pit. Gzera Shema Yalav Lashvez Gumais. Maybe I'll come to level out the bottom of the pit. Maybe I'll come to dig divots out of the side. Kamash Malan, the Chazal did not make any such Gezerah. Okay. Now we're going to move on to Siman Shin Lamed Zayin, and the Mishnah Berurah gives us one of his trademark hakdamus over here in the Mishnah Berurah. So before we even start the Mechaber in Shin Lamed Zayin, we're going to see the beautiful words of the Chavetz Chaim. It's less than, maybe it's a third of the way down in the Mishnah Berurah, at least in my print, and it begins with the word akdim. Says the Chavetz Chaim, akdim l'simin zeh, I'm going to make a little preface to this siman, hakdama kitzara, a short preface, vihi, and that preface is as follows. Chayrish hu echad milamites of his malachis. Plowing is certainly one of the lamites malachis, right? Not allowed to plow on Shabbos. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, V'kevan shekavanas hachayrish l'rafuye ara. The purpose of plowing is to soften the ground. When you plow, you break up the ground, which is necessary. It's a necessary step in planting. You need to break up the ground. The ground has to be aerated. The water has to be able to get into the ground. So you need to break up the ground. So the da'az toiv lizriya, that improves the ground for planting. V'gam kavanasai lahashvais hagumois, also when you plow, another thing you accomplish when you plow is that you fill in irregularities in the ground, uliyapoisai, and you improve it, kidei sheyeh mokom shaveh, so that you have a nice level furrow. It doesn't mean that when you look at the field, the field is level. It's not. It's got furrows, right? But the furrows themselves are level. V'lachein, therefore, hachayfer basadeh, somebody who digs in a field, oy shasachritz, or somebody who makes a trench or a furrow in a field, oy shayasham tail katan, or if there was a little hill in a field, a bump, v'shpiloi, and you lower it, level it out. Oy shayasham makim namuch, or there's a divot, there's a little pit in the field. V'hishvai, so you fill it in to level it out. V'chein kol mashve gumais b'makam arayil izriya. Indeed, anybody who goes and fills in little divots in a field where it's a royal izriya, a field that could be planted, Chayiv mishum chayrish. All of this would be an Issa Daraisa of chayrish. So what did the Mishnah Berurah say so far? The purpose of chayrish plowing is to improve the ground to allow for planting. Part of the improvement of the ground is being mashvegumais. It's breaking it up, softening it, making it level. All of these are part and parcel of chayrish. Therefore, if you go out to a field, you don't have a plow, you have a shovel. You go out to a field and you start filling in little divots in the field, in a field that could be used for planting, that's an Issa Daraisa of chayrish. And if you do this in a house, if you have a house with an earthen floor and there's a little indentation in the ground and you fill it in, it's not chayrish because you don't plant in a house. It's not royal Izriya. But then chayv mishum boina. That would be a problem of boina, construction. Shemasakin abinyan al yedezeh. Because you are repairing and fixing up the house. It's a repair job on a house. So that's an Isser of boina. So again, to be mashve gumais in a sadeh, that's royal Izriya, it's a daraisa chayrish, plowing. To be mashve gumais in the earthen floor of a house, it's a daraisa of boina. Same act, but because of where you're doing it, two different Isser daraisa. V'chein, and similarly continues the Mishnah Berurah, kol ma she'oisa liyapis akarka, anything you do in order to improve land, hu teledes chayrish. I don't mean like building a house is an improvement on the land. I mean improving the ground. Anything you do to improve the ground, hu teledes chayrish, is a telada of chayrish, v'chay b'kol shehu, and it would be Issa Daraisa if you do the slightest amount. Okay, so that is the Mishnah Berurah's hakdama here to Shin Lamed Zayin. Let's begin Shin Lamed Zayin. It says the Mechaber, Shin Lamed Zayin didn't keep it a bias. The halachas that pertain to sweeping a house, the davar she'ena miskavein, and the halachas that apply to a davar she'ena miskavein. When you do something that results in a malacha, but you had no intent to do that malacha. U'bay dal seifim, and here we have 4 seifim. Very, very kloliistic. A very important yisoid in Hilchos Shabbos that we really know already from, again, Leiv Chacham Liyabin. We know it already from the rest of Chelik Gimel, but here is where it is put down in the Mechaber and in the Mishnah Berurah so eloquently. Says the Mechaber Sifal, Davar she'ein miskaven mutter. When you do a malacha, but you did an act with no intent to do that malacha at all. You did an act that resulted in that malacha, but you had no intent to do that malacha. Mutter, that's mutter. Important caveat, but that's only true. Shaloi psik reisha. But it can't be inevitable. It can't be that the act that you did inevitably results in the performance of that malacha. So, you did an act, and it might result in a malacha taking place. That's okay, because the malacha is a davar she'ein miskaven, it's mutter. But if you do a maisa, and inevitably a malacha is going to take place, whether you wanted that malacha or not, it's a psik reisha. Remember, psik reisha v'lo yamas, could you cut off the head of a chicken and it won't die? No, when you cut off the head of a chicken, it's inevitably going to die. So, same thing. If you do an act, and it is inevitable that by virtue of you performing that act, a malacha is going to be carried out, so that's psik reisha, that's usher, even though it's a davar she'ein miskaven. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Leis Katan Aleph. Davar she'ein miskaven, the Mechaber said is mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Zeh lashon Rambam. This is the lashon of the Rambam. Dvarim hamutarim la'asoisan b'Shabbos. An act that is mutter to do on Shabbos. So we're going to see the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber is going to give us the famous example, dragging a bench. You have a bench that's sitting in the backyard on the ground. You're allowed, there is no one of the Lamites Malachas that says that you're not allowed to drag a bench. You're allowed to drag a bench on Shabbos. So, Dvarim hamutarim la'asoisan b'Shabbos. Something that is mutter to do on Shabbos. Ubishas asiyasan. But when you do that act, efsher, it is possible, sheteyasa beglalon melacha acheres, it is possible that one of the lamites malachas will be performed. The efsher, shaloi teyasa. But it's also possible that it won't happen. So you're dragging a bench. Now, if it's not a particularly heavy bench, if it is possible that by dragging the bench on the ground, it's going to cause a chritz, it's going to cause a trench in the ground, it's going to dig out a trench in the ground, it's possible that it will, it's possible that it won't. If it does, you will have performed the malach of chayrish. Making a trench in the ground is the malach of chayrish. We just learned that in Akdama. So, you're dragging a bench. Says the Mishnah Berurah, says the Rambam, he's quoting the Rambam. Dragging a bench is mutter. Now, if it's possible that it will make a trench, but it's also possible that it won't make a trench, if you have no kavanah to make the trench, mutter, it's mutter. That's the kavanah of what the mechaber is saying here. So again, you want to move a bench in the backyard from point A to point B. Do you have kavanah to make a chritz? No, you have absolutely no kavanah to make a chritz. Not only that, I dare say you probably don't want a chritz, right? But you certainly have no kavanah to make a chritz. You just want to move the bench from point A to point B. So you want to drag a bench outside in the backyard just to transport the bench from point A to point B. Says the Rambam, you have no kavanah to make a trench. Now, it's possible that you will make a trench. It's possible that you won't make a trench. So it's a davar she'eino miskavin. You have no kavanah to make the trench. And it's possible that you'll make a trench, but it's also possible that you won't. That's the davar she'eino miskavin. It's mutter. Now, if you wanted to make a trench, of course it's usher. That's chayrish 101. You wanted to make a trench, you made a trench. So this is daraisa, right? That's chayrish 101. If it's a psik ratio that you're going to make a trench, if it's an extremely heavy bench, and you know for a fact that when you drag it, you're going to make a trench, that's also chayrish 101. Because dreimenish kikop, it's a davar she'eino miskavin. You knew that when you dragged the bench, you were going to make a chritz. But the middle ground, which is you have no kavanah to make a trench, and it's not inevitable that you're going to make a trench. You might make a trench, you might not make a trench. That is mutter. Ice cut and base, psik ratio, but if it's a psik ratio, pirish, what does psik ratio mean? Shebevadai teyasu malacha acheres. If it's an extremely heavy bench, and it is inevitable that you're going to make a trench, then it is aser. Continues the mechaber, hilkach. Therefore, based on this golden rule, says the mechaber, geirer adam mita kisei v'safsel. You're allowed to drag on the ground. That's what geirer means. You're allowed to drag on the ground mita, a bed, kisei, kisei, a chair, v'safsel, a bench, bein gedolim, whether they're big. Now, big means relative. And we'll see what the Mishnah Berurah says, why the mechaber says big here. Big does not mean that it's big and heavy and it's certainly going to make a trench. That would be a psik ratio. So it's not that big. It's bein gedolim, whether it's a big kisei, whether it's a big mita kisei v'safsel, big tanim, whether it's a small kisei v'safsel, you're allowed to go ahead and drag it on the ground. U'bolvad shelo yiskav l'aseh chritz. As long as you have no kavanah to make a trench. If you have kavanah to make a trench, of course it's aser. And also, bilvad, he doesn't say this, it has to be that it's not so big that it's a psik ratio. If it's so big that it's a psik ratio, that would be aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, an interesting Mishnah Berurah is cut in Gimel. Hilkach, pirish. Cave on the davar she'eino miskavin mutter, since we just learned this rule, that a davar she'eino miskavin that's not a psik ratio is mutter. Therefore, you're allowed to drag the bench. Da'afa gav de bigri rasoi motzui. Very important word. Motzui sheyasu charitzim. Even though it is common that by dragging a bench on the ground you will make a chritz, it's common. Motzui. It's common that you'll make a chritz. Bakarka. And you're coming again up against the Yisad of chayrish, making a trench as chayrish. Afilu hachi lav psik ratio. It's motzoi, it's common that it happens, but it's not inevitable. Psik ratio, Rabbi Yisai, means inevitable. When you cut off a chicken's head, it is inevitable that the chicken will die. It's not motzoi. Yeah. It's common that when you chop off the head of a chicken, it dies. No, it's inevitable. You cut off there's no such thing as a living chicken without a head. So it is a psik ratio v'lo yamus. It's inevitable that when you cut off the head of a chicken, it dies. It is not inevitable that when you drag the bench, you're going to make a chritz. It's common, but it's not inevitable. So la psik ratio, afilu b'karka she'eino merutzefes, even if this is raw ground with no tiles or anything, or paving blocks on it, the efshir shapir shaloi tachritz b'karka, because it's possible, it's very possible that you won't make a chritz. Now, the mechaber said this is mutter bein gedolim, bein ketanim. Whether the thing that you're dragging is big or small. Now that presents us with a little bit of a problem, because if it's really gadol, if it's really big and heavy, and it's inevitable that it's going to make a chritz, then it's a psik reisha and it's aser. So why did the Mechaber say this? What did the Mechaber mean to teach us when he said bein gedolim bein ketanim? Again, he can't mean bein gedolim even if they're very big, because if they're very big, then it's a psik reisha and then it's taka aser. So he doesn't mean that. So what does he mean when he says bein gedolim bein ketanim? And what was he trying to teach us? So Mishnah Berurah tells us beautifully what the Mechaber meant. Bein gedolim, says the Mishnah Berurah, you have to understand what the Mechaber meant. Bein gedolim demitrach leili soim al ksefoi, whether they're big and therefore it's a big tercha to carry it instead of dragging it, ubein ketanim, or even if it's small, the yacha likachem al ksefoi, where really you could carry it. See, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is the Mechaber wants to tell us it is 100% mutter to drag the bench. Don't think, you might be tempted to say, maybe we're only matter you to drag the bench if the bench is heavy. If the bench is heavy, it would be a very big tercha to carry it. We're not going to be matriach you to carry it. We'll be matter you to drag it. But if the bench is small, why should we be matter you to carry it, to drag it? Pick it up. It's small. Pick it up. Says the Mechaber, no. Bein gedolim, bein ketanim. You don't have to pick it up. Even if you could pick it up, you don't have to pick it up. Why? Because it's a davar she'en miskaven and sarab sigracious mutter. Afilu hachi mutter loy legar ram ala aretz. Kasav Magen Avram, but the Magen Avram points out the gedolim beyoser. If the bench is really big, also ligra ala aretz, then you can't drag it on the ground to psik reishu to bavadi chritz, because then it falls under the rubric of psik reisha, and that would be awesome because you're going to make a trench. This is an interesting thing that the Mishnah Berurah says, which we're going to come up against over the following days, and we're going to have to deal with it. The Mishnah Berurah says, a bench that you're not allowed to drag on the ground, a very big bench that's a psik reisha that it'll make a trench, so you're not allowed to drag it on the ground. You're not even allowed to drag it if there are patio blocks. Now, why? You're not going to make a trench into patio blocks. Why is it also? Even if there are stone blocks, you're not allowed to drag the bench on the blocks. The gazrinan merutzef adu ena merutzef, because we make exera. So you hear what he's saying? A very big, heavy bench that would be a psik reisha to make a chritz on the bare ground of the backyard. Not only are you not allowed to drag it on the bare ground of the backyard, you're also not allowed to drag it on a patio of patio blocks because of exera. We'll have to deal with that in the coming days. Okay, let's finish off this sif. Says the Mechaber weiter, 2 lines off the bottom near the end of the line. Umuta l'rabeitz habayis. You're allowed to be merabeitz habayis. Rabeitz means what they used to do when they had earthen floors was they used to take water and they used to spray water into the air near the floor to take down the dust. You have an earthen floor, sometimes dust, right? Dirt, very fine particles are coming up off the floor. Imagine you take a spray bottle with a mist and you mist the floor to take down the dust. There's a fancy English word for it. It's not coming to me right now. Says the Mechaber, mutter l'rabeitz habayis. You're allowed to do this on an earthen floor. Kevan she'einu miskaven lahashvais gumais. Because even though when the water lands on the floor, sometimes it has the effect of a little bit leveling out the floor, that's not considered being mashve gumais. You have no kavana. It's a davar she'einu miskaven. You're doing it to hold down the dust. You're not doing it to be mashve gumais. And it's not a psik reisha that it's going to do ashvais gumais. Elo shalayala avak. Your intent in doing it is just to hold down the dust. Therefore, says the Mechaber, this is mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, hey, l'rabeitz lahazoy smayim ala karka abayis. This means to sprinkle water on the earthen floor of the house. Kadei shalayav ha'avak. There's no problem of zareya here. because nothing grows inside the house. It's a makom drisas raglayim. It's indoors. Nothing grows. There's no zereya issue. It's only a potential issue of being mashve gumais. But to be mashve gumais, it's a davar she'enim iskaven, and it's not a psikresha. The havagav the baharbata kama pa'amim ismalam agumais ba'afar ba'avak. See, even though it's common that when you spray this water down, it fills certain things in and it has the effect of being mashve small gumais. It's mutter because it's a davar she'enim iskaven. The gam lav psikresha. And you're allowed to do this even on bare ground. Okay, we're going to pause over here. Continue next time with Sif Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. The schus of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Shem should send Yeshuas, Refuas, Parnaset, Sheduchim to those in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS called Tzedek B'mher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.